Chairman, thank you.
Good afternoon and welcome to this Joint Standards Committee on Thursday the 19th of December 2024. My name is Councillor Mark Bassinger and I am the Chairperson of this committee. Members, we are streaming this meeting live as well as recording, and by being present in the meeting you are giving your consent to being recorded. During each item, please put up your hand to indicate if you wish to speak. I will then invite you at the appropriate time. Could I ask members to avoid approaching the top table, as this could create interference with the cameras and live stream. Please note that the YouTube live stream sound recording is dependent on the correct use of the microphones. Therefore, can I ask that when invited to speak, you remember to turn on your microphone and turn it off when finished. Please reference a page or paragraph number when referring to the agenda papers and keep your contributions as clear and concise as possible. We don't have any fire alarm testing scheduled for today. If you hear the alarm, please exit using either of the two marked fire escape routes. Item 2 of the agenda, apologies for absence. Tara, may I have any apologies for absence, please?
Yes, Chairman, thank you. Apologies been received from Councillor Burwood and Councillor Morgan and Parish Councillor Stratton, and Councillor Driver is attending as a substitute for Councillor Burwood. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Item 3, declarations of interest.
So I think, just to interrupt the Chair, I think Councillor Stratton is here.
Yes, of course Councillor Stratton is here. Tara, did you have you recorded that Councillor Stratton is actually here?
Oh, apologies, Chairman. That's my apologies. I'll mark that down. Sorry. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor. Okay, item 3, declarations of interest. To disclose the existence and nature of any disclosable pecuniary interest, other registrable interest and non-registrable interest relating to items of business on the agenda having regard to paragraph 9 and appendix B of the Code of Conduct of Members. Members are reminded that they are also required to disclose any such interest as soon as they become aware should the need arise throughout the meeting. Members. We have no disclosure of interest. Thank you, Tara.
Thank you, Chairman.
We now move to agenda item 4, found on page 5 to 68 of your agenda pack. I refer everyone present to the hearing procedure found on page 4 of this agenda pack and details the procedure we will follow for this meeting. I will now ask all persons present at the meeting to introduce themselves, please. Councillor Thompson.
Thank you. Councillor Maddie Thompson, member for Thompson-Darcy Ward.
Holmes.
Mrs Holmes, I'm the monitoring officer and the lead legal specialist at Maldon District Council.
Thank you. And good afternoon, Mr. Oram. Would you introduce yourself, please?
Thank you, Chair. My name's Alex Oram. I'm a director of CH&I Associates, and we were invited by the previous monitoring officer actually to investigate the complaints related to your considerations today.
Great. Thank you very much and welcome. I shall now call on Miss Holmes.
You're going to go around the ring.
Do we need to go around the ring?
List members, would you like?
Perhaps we should. Why should we not?
We've got a new member here as well.
Yeah, so Councillor Lay, if you would kick us off, please.
Councillor Andrew Lay, District Council member for Maldon East.
Councillor Emma Stevens, I'm Maldon District Councillor for Tolsbury.
Councillor Matthew Neal, I'm Maldon District Councillor for Tillingham Ward.
Councillor John Driver, I'm the District Councillor for Maldon West Ward.
Councillor Michael, English Parish Council.
My name is John Mitchell. I'm the independent person for the council.
Thank you.
Councillor Steve Stratton, South Ward, Burnham on Crouch.
Thank you, members. I shall now call on Miss Holmes, who is the lead legal specialist and monitoring officer, to explain the process.
Thank you, Chair.
Good afternoon, members. The two matters before you and the procedure notes are set out within the agenda item. We will deal with each complaint separately and we'll follow the same process for both. In both cases, Mr. Oram will give a summary and present his report. Members and of the committee will have an opportunity to ask him any questions. We will then move on. Mr. Mitchell, the independent person, will provide his advice in relation to the complaints. We will then, with your agreement, go into private and confidential to discuss the decision, and members of the public will be required to leave through that point. We will then come back with the decision. We will then, should it be required, discuss any sanctions, and then that decision will also go into private and confidential session. Just for noting, Councillor Rawlinson, who is the subject of this complaint, has since resigned, so there will be no sanctions open to you, but the complaint has gone through a process and a decision does need to be made today. Thank you very much, Chair.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. So now I shall go to you, Mr. Oram, please, if you would present your report.
Thank you, Chair, and thanks for. I would just say in the first place, I'm sorry that I'm not there with you today. Clearly, Councillor Rawlinson's resignation has had an impact on this matter, and had he been there to want to discuss this, and I would have made sure I was. But I hope members will get across from me a clear understanding of our own considerations. You might see my colleague Mark Hedges in the background. He was actually the principal investigator responsible for carrying out the evidence gathering part of this investigation. So he's present in case any of the questions that members ask require his input. I will now obviously take you through the report. I've been asked to present a summary of it to you today, and then to try to answer any remaining questions that you might have. I do this on the basis that you've all had the opportunity to read through the report in full, and for that I thank you for your attention. We were invited to investigate 3 complaints that the monitoring officer received about Councillor Rawlinson's conduct. The first was submitted by the Town Council's Chief Officer, who alleged that Councillor Rawlinson had sent her WhatsApp messages that included offensive remarks about 2 other women, had deliberately excluded her from a training course and instead improperly used his position to pay for himself to attend, and then used information he'd obtained from that training course in order to publicly humiliate and belittle her at a Town Council meeting on the 25th of March 2024. In the second complaint, a member of the public stated that they'd been shocked by the level of unprofessionalism that they'd witnessed at that Town Council meeting of the 25th of March, and had become distressed at the way in which Councillor Rawlinson had spoken to both the Chief Officer, Councillor Stamp, a member of the District Council, and other members of the Town Council. In the third complaint, Councillor Stratton made several allegations against Councillor Rawlinson, some of which mirrored those that we've already referred to. These are set out in detail on our report, which is found from page 22 of the bundle. And so I'm not going to go through them in detail now because I intend to when I set out our findings and considerations. Our evidence in the report, we've sought to present it in a way that we hope best assists the reader in understanding the relevant facts. Where documentary evidence wasn't available, we reached our conclusions based on the oral evidence that we were able to receive, and then by making balance of probability decisions where there was a conflict. The balance of probability test is the same test that you'll be asked to use when you're considering this matter today, and I'm sure the monitoring officer will be able to assist you if you have any questions about that. I will now briefly explain our findings and set out our recommendations in relation to the various allegations made. I would add that in our report we included what we considered to be the relevant paragraphs of the Town Council's Code of Conduct, along with what I hope is helpful guidance in relation to how each has been applied. And while a councillor's freedom of speech is not explicitly referenced in the code, we've included considerations around that right, because any restriction of a councillor's right to free speech must be shown to be both necessary and proportionate. The first matter we considered were the allegations from the Chief Officer and Councillor Stratton that Councillor Rawlinson sent the Chief Officer WhatsApp messages that had included offensive remarks about two other women. We were satisfied, based on the findings of our investigation, that Councillor Rawlinson sent two images via WhatsApp to the Chief Officer that were intended to mock Councillor Stamp and Councillor Donnelly respectively. These are found on pages 24 and 25 of the bundle. Councillor Rawlinson also shared a link on Instagram to the Chief Officer featuring a woman stating, "My name is Wendy and I'm a," and then an incredibly rude expletive that's included in the report. We thought this was a clear and deliberate reference to Councillor Stamp. While we accept Councillor Rawlinson's explanation that the images were sent because he thought the Chief Officer would find them amusing, and that his intention had not been to suggest anything about Councillor Stamp beyond her resemblance to the image that was sent, we thought his actions were unprofessional and disrespectful. And while we noted that he contended that they were sent in a private capacity, as a joke just between him and the clerk, we believe that communications between a councillor and a member of their staff will almost always considered to be within the scope of the code, particularly when those messages concern other councillors. We therefore recommended in our report that in relation to these allegations, Councillor Rawlinson was found to have failed to comply with paragraph 1.1 of the code because he failed to treat others with respect. The next allegations we considered concern the report that Councillor Rawlinson made to the police about the Town Council's finances and the responsibility that he then took in being their main point of contact. The investigation found that Councillor Rawlinson formally contacted the police in early June 2023 to allege that the Town Council's former administration had potentially been involved in fraudulent activity, which had resulted in £15,000 going missing from the Town Council's accounts. This police report was made in the name of the Town Council as a whole, despite the fact that Councillor Rawlinson had been given no authority by the Town Council to make such a report. Councillor Rawlinson also granted the police access to the Town Council's bank accounts 3 days before the Town Council agreed that this could happen. While we can understand that this would have been a highly sensitive matter that may have necessitated urgent action being taken, we saw no compelling reason to explain why Councillor Rawlinson could not have obtained a resolution from the Town Council before taking the actions that he did. And had the urgency existed, we thought it more appropriate for the Chief Officer to have led on this matter rather than Councillor Rawlinson. Having taken responsibility for being the main point of contact, Councillor Rawlinson then failed to keep the Council properly updated with regards to the progress of that investigation. Indeed, while we note his rejection of this finding, we were satisfied, based on the evidence we set out in the report, that Councillor Rawlinson allowed for a letter to be sent out in his name on the 1st of August 2023, which explicitly stated that the investigation by the police was ongoing, despite the fact that Councillor Rawlinson had already been told that the matter had been shut down, pending additional information from him or the Town Council. It appears, given the content of this exchange with the police, that he then failed to ensure that the Chief Officer was able to respond to any of those questions asked by them, because he didn't update her on the matter either. We were of the view that this was conduct that represented Councillor Rawlinson bringing his role and authority into disrepute, and therefore a failure to comply with paragraph 5 of the code. The next allegation we considered related to the purchase of personal attack alarms and a ring doorbell for staff, in what was alleged to be an attempt to pressure Councillor Stratton into resigning as a member of the Town Council for mental health reasons. As part of this, we also considered Councillor Rawlinson's involvement in attending a meeting with the District Council's Elections Officer to discuss Councillor Stratton. Our considerations in relation to this matter are set out in full on pages 56 and 57 of our report. In our view, the investigation found insufficient evidence to support the allegation that Councillor Rawlinson's conduct amounted to a breach of the code. Firstly, it was not for us to consider whether the purchase of the alarms was proportionate. It was relevant though to us that it was a collective decision that had been made by the recess team. We also considered it reasonable for Councillor Rawlinson to express his concerns about Councillor Stratton privately in a letter to the monitoring officer. That's not in any way to say that those concerns were justified, but if a councillor has concerns, then that's the proper way to express them. Furthermore, in terms of the meeting with the elections officer, which we found was driven by Councillor Clegg, it appears that this was arranged so that they could receive professional advice. And while we didn't think it was necessary for this meeting to have taken place, we found no evidence to suggest that Councillor Rawlinson had attempted to put any pressure on the Chief Officer or the Elections Officer to participate in the meeting, provide them with confidential information, or provide him with advice that they wouldn't have normally given. Moving on to the allegation that Councillor Rawlinson raised matters relating to the police investigation during the public part of a Town Council meeting on the 14th of November 2023. We firstly found that members of the Town Council had voted to allow Councillor Rawlinson to refer to the findings of the interim audit report in public. Whilst they obviously were not aware of what he was about to say, they must all share responsibility for making this decision and for any fallout that occurred from it. Members of the previous administration were clearly upset by what was said, but we found that his state Councillor Rawlinson's statement was largely consistent with the findings of that interim audit report and didn't see any evidence of him making any accusations or even insinuations about the individual conduct of any of those previous members of the administration. We also noted that whilst Councillor Rawlinson did disclose the fact that the matter had been reported to the police, he also informed members that the police had found no evidence of criminality. We therefore recommend that Councillor Rawlinson isn't found in breach of the code in relation to these matters. We think that such a finding would be a disproportionate restriction on his freedom of speech rights. The next matter we considered related to the allegation that Councillor Rawlinson acted without integrity and honesty during a meeting of the Town Council held on the 12th of December when he refused to read out a statement of apology on the basis that he had not seen either the minutes of the previous meeting or the apology that had been prepared by the Chief Officer. Councillor Stratton asserted that this was a lie. We, for the reasons stated in the report, accepted Councillor Stratton's evidence that there was a receipt provided, but we didn't think that on its own was sufficient to show that Councillor Rawlinson had read the information, and therefore we didn't think that this was a matter for which he should be found in breach. Councillor Rawlinson did, though, confirm that at a roundtable meeting organised by the monitoring officer, he had denied writing both the letter of apology to Councillor Stratton and the letter of the 1st of August to all councillors with regards to the police investigation into the Town Council's finances. We were satisfied on the balance of probabilities that, despite his denial, he was at least aware that the apology being made in his name, and therefore that he had likely consented to it, and that Councillor Rawlinson was aware and consented to the Chief Officer sending out that letter on the 1st of August. By his denial, therefore, we felt unfairly called into question the reliability and integrity of the Chief Officer in suggesting that she had acted without his consent, and therefore we are recommending that he is found to have failed to comply with paragraph 1.2 of the code with regards to that allegation. In relation to the allegation that he deliberately excluded the Chief Officer from the training course and improperly used his position to pay for himself to attend, we concluded that he didn't actually intentionally exclude her. And when considering whether he used his position improperly, we noted that whilst he made the booking without prior approval from the Town Council, the meeting took place, no meeting took place between him deciding to go and the course taking place, and also the fact that the expenditure was agreed by the Town Council subsequently, and had they not agreed, then it would have simply been down to him to cover those costs. We therefore didn't think it was an improper use of his position and do not recommend that he's found to have failed to comply with the code with regard to that matter. And finally, and thank you for your patience in listening to me talk through all of this, we considered the allegation that Councillor Rawlinson used information that he had obtained on that training course in order to publicly humiliate and belittle the Chief Officer at a meeting on the 25th of March 2024. Our account of that meeting is set out in detail on pages 40 to 47 of the agenda papers. and our considerations in relation to what happened at that meeting are set out in full on pages 60 and 61. You will see that we were satisfied that the Chief Officer was bullied at that meeting because certain members chose to abuse their power as councillors to publicly undermine her in a manner that made her feel vulnerable and clearly caused her to become visibly upset. While we don't hold Councillor Rawlinson wholly responsible for what happened at that meeting, we did consider on balance that his conduct did amount to bullying, partly because of his position as mayor and the importance of his relationship to the town clerk. He allowed that meeting to take place in public, knowing what it was likely to contain, and then he actively participated in it and in criticising the clerk publicly, undermining and arguing with her, even when it became clear that she was becoming very distressed. We therefore recommend that Councillor Rawlinson be found to have failed to comply with paragraph 2.1 of the Code in relation to his conduct at that meeting. That concludes my presentation of the report. You will see our recommendations are summarised on pages 61 and 62 of the report, and I'm happy to take any questions that any members might have. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Oram. Thank you for your very deep report. Members, I would now like to open that up for questions. So if anyone has any questions to ask of Mr. Oram, please do so. Mr. Councillor Driver.
Thank you very much, Chair. Mr. Oram, I just refer to a comment made in Councillor Rawlinson's response to the draft report, which is found on page 7.3.3, first bullet point. He says that evidence has not been sought from a wide range of councillors, and that as a result the evidence is extremely skewed against him. In reading through the report, it does appear that there is quite a narrow range of councillors that have been interviewed. Just like your opinion on that particular position. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Yeah, I mean, I have a couple of comments to make in that regard. Firstly, as with any investigation, we have to ensure that it's proportionate to what's meant to be a light touch regulatory scheme. You know, this investigation comes at a cost to the District Council. As members can see, it was quite a lengthy and detailed investigation already. It's not for us to interview every single person who had any involvement in any of these matters. What we did do, just to explain our process, is we invited Councillor Rawlinson to provide us with the name of any people who he'd like us to talk to, or he thought might have useful evidence to present to the investigation. I don't believe that Councillor Rawlinson put forward the names of any councillors, or indeed any individuals at any point during the investigation to suggest that we talk with them. We did approach a couple of councillors who we felt might be more aligned to Councillor Rawlinson. I think that's right, isn't it, Mark? Yeah, in particular, Councillor Clegg, who was involved in, as a member of the recess team, was obviously involved in the election meeting and was present during many of these interactions. Unfortunately, she made no response to any of our efforts to communicate with her, and we don't have the powers to compel councillors to participate in these meetings. So apologies for the sun not coming through. So that, I mean, that would explain, I think, I hope, that why the information that you've got is based on what we were able to obtain. I would stress again that during the investigation, Councillor Rawlinson was invited to put forward the names of anyone who he'd like us to talk to, and he did not give us the names of anybody.
Thanks for letting me come back. I understand those comments. I note that in the second investigation, which we'll come to a little later, Councillor Mumford is mentioned in respect to the fact that she is the chair of the staffing committee. And it might have seemed worthy to discuss this with the chair of the staffing committee, given that they have presumably a role in terms of dealing with staffing matters within the council. Thank you.
I absolutely take that comment on board. I think What we were looking largely here was that most of the facts in this case are not in dispute, and the evidence that we obtained was largely documentary in terms of what we're basing our breaches of the code on. The contested facts, as it were, i.e. is really only whether Councillor Rawlinson was aware of the apology letter being sent out, and aware of the other letter that was sent by the clerk, and the chief officer, and the chief officer was able to provide us with screenshots and documentary evidence and emails that strongly supported the suggestion that he was aware of those things, and Councillor Mumford and the other councillors wouldn't necessarily have had any information to help us resolve that dispute. And so that was largely the thinking behind the way that we approached it.
Councillor Driver, does that answer are you happy with that? Anybody else? Councillor Lay.
Thank you, and thank you for your presentation. Just a couple of points of clarification. The phones used to send the messages between the principal officer and the mayor, were they council issued or were they private phones, and were they used for contact with other councillors? Was it a messaging system used with other people around the council? That's the first point.
They would have been private phones.
Okay.
The town council doesn't give its members telephones or pay for contracts, and they were made within a WhatsApp group between Councillor Rawlinson and the chief officer, which largely included. We didn't do a full review of every single exchange that had happened between the two of them, but it largely related to council business.
Thank you. It's just I worked in an organisation where there's a complete separation between private and private personal stuff and business, and that makes it very clear segregation as to how the messages are sent.
Absolutely. What I would say on that is around considerations on capacity, and this comes up a lot when councillors use social media, particularly when they use their private accounts on Facebook, and they write messages on there. The general considerations that we make on cases like that is whether the subject matter relates directly to council business or not. If it doesn't relate to council business, then a councillor generally wouldn't be considered to be acting in their official capacity. So if they'd said something offensive about Ipswich Town Football Club, for instance, then it's unlikely that matter is going to be considered within the capacity, even if everybody knows that the person making it was a councillor. But if a message or a statement is shown to be about a matter that relates to council business, which would include the offensive comments about their colleagues on the council, then those matters would likely be considered within capacity, regardless of whether it was a private Facebook account, or even actually regardless of whether their identity was known, because it's important that the code doesn't allow councillors anonymously to go online and start making abusive or offensive remarks about each other or about council officers.
Okay. I have another question, Absolutely. A separate issue. Recommendation under recommendation 6.1, there's paragraph 5 of the code, where the Councillor Rawlinson is believed to have brought this office in town council into disrepute when initiating a police investigation. There was, again, speaking with a financial background, there is obviously the issue around when you discover or find something that's not right, where do you refer it to, which is a difficult process where in councils, because for example, a financial institution, it's very clear. You go to a fraud department, you go to an internal investigation, and you obviously do not speak to anyone because of the area of tipping off, which is under the Proceeds of Crime Act 2002. So it's difficult to know how to behave when you discover it, where you don't know the extent of it, who's involved, all those issues. and I'd expect probably the monitoring officer is the first point of contact for that, someone that sits outside your area or council. So around that area, the initiation, once that's happened, would you like to explain a little further whether there's an overlap into other areas?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, in the first instance, I would say that because this relates to a town council, actually your monitoring officer would have no purview over this at all. The monitoring officer of the district council only has any authority over code of conduct issues. I agree absolutely that finding out something like this would have been difficult for them to know what to do, particularly at that tier of local authority.
Yeah.
There isn't a lot of support out there. I think the point that we've tried to make is that whilst Councillor Rawlinson was the mayor, he has no delegated authority to act on behalf of the town council. And so if he or the chief officer thought, and obviously this call was initially made whilst he was having a discussion about this matter with the chief officer and Councillor Stratton. If they were wondering what should happen, and whether it was too sensitive to take to the town council at that stage, and that it would be better to get police involved first, then that would absolutely be the job of the chief officer to progress that. She is effectively the chief executive of that authority, very much like you have a chief executive. You wouldn't expect the chair of your council, I don't think, to progress with the police a matter of financial impropriety within your authority. In the same way, the town council shouldn't have an elected member progressing this. It should be the responsibility of the chief officer. And we can see that the issues that this caused further down the line by the fact that Councillor Rawlinson then, for whatever purpose, it's been suggested for political purposes, because it suited him to have doubt caused on the way that the previous administration had conducted themselves, decided not to then update the town council sufficiently as the matter progressed.
Okay, thank you very much.
Yeah. Councillor, are you happy? Could I just sort of go back to your first point about the telephones? I would just like to say that none of us are ever issued with private phones, just as a matter of clarity. So, you know, we do get, we are issued with council computers, but phones we are not. So consequently, we all use our own phones for every day and for business, should I say. Just as a matter of clarity, that's all. Thank you. Yes, anyone? Yes, yes.
Thank you, Chair. Again, Mr. Orme, on page 19, this relates to complaint 2, paragraph 43. A lady, Ms. Georgia White, is mentioned, a member of the public, and she has raised concerns and asked that her complaint, or asked Miss Payne in paragraph 4.4 that her complaint be forwarded to the appropriate authorities. Were you able, I believe in somewhere I'd read that you didn't actually speak to her. I just wondered that, you know, obviously given her some credibility, your reason for giving that credibility. Thank you.
We've made no reference to the complainant in complaint 2 at all in terms of credibility. We were asked to investigate the allegation that she made. Now, this is a scheme that isn't like a normal complaint scheme where the complainant sits at the heart of it and you would investigate whether there's been any injustice to that complainant and that needs to be redressed. This is about objectively looking at a councillor's conduct against a code. And so in some ways, and I don't mean to dismiss it, but in some ways the person who reports the alleged activity, their status and isn't for us to judge. We simply are tasked. It may have been looked at by the assessment stage by the monitoring officer, but we've been tasked simply to look at how Councillor Rawlinson behaved at the meeting and whether it amounts to a breach of the code or not. Now, given that the complainant was at the meeting, she certainly had the potential to be a witness for us so that we could establish how Councillor Rawlinson did act at that meeting. But we were fortunate to have a recording of the meeting, so we were able to listen to exactly what was said and exactly how Councillor Rawlinson conducted himself. So we didn't see the need to bother her further or go to the additional expense of seeking her witness evidence in relation to that matter. And hopefully the report makes it clear that any views around what she looked at are her views alone. We're not making any comment on the credibility or veracity of them in any way.
Councillor Driver.
Yes, thank you. One more, if I may. Thank you, Mr. Warren. On page 21, paragraph 4.6, you refer to the investigation. We've considered documents sent to us by the council, the chief officer, Councillor Stratton and Councillor Rawlinson. Given that there is obviously an issue about the way in which the council communicates and who has the authority to speak on behalf of the council, in that statement about documents you've received or sent to you from the council, who are the council in that context?
My apologies. That is an oversight on our part. We have tried throughout the report to refer to the district council and the town council as different entities. So that is a slip on ours, and thank you for bringing that to my attention. We mean there the district council. That would be the document pack that we received at the outset when the district council instructed us to investigate these matters.
Thank you, that's clear, thank you.
Thank you. Yes, Mr. Mitchell.
Thank you, Chairman. Just an observation and a question, really. I've had the benefit of hearing listening to the recording of the meeting of the 25th of March, and I have no reason whatsoever to disagree with your findings. In fact, it seemed that Councillor Rawlinson, or Mr. Rawlinson as he now is, couldn't wait to pitch into the chief officer of the town council. But it also seemed to me that other people were in the queue there, and the meeting was so badly chaired that they weren't called to speak. And you could hear them making questions, making reference, and actually essentially joining in what seemed to be let's have a go at the clerk competition. I wonder if you picked up on that and whether you think there are wider issues, or were, because we now have a very different council, mainly because they've all resigned, at Burnham on Crouch, whether there were wider issues going on at the time beyond those that are reported here, amongst other then members of the council. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you.
Thank you. Absolutely, we do. We've alluded to them, I think, a little bit in our report. We have to be very cautious in that regard, because under the Localism Act, which is the power that gives the monitoring officer the ability to investigate a councillor's conduct, and that authority is what is effectively passed to us to do an independent investigation. That authority only exists where a written complaint has been submitted about an individual councillor's conduct. So in relation to this matter, it was only right and proper for us to comment in any detail on the behaviour of Councillor Rawlinson and say how we considered he had behaved at that meeting. I think in our comments, we did point out the fact that there was wider criticism to be made, which I think you've rightly identified on listening to the recording, and that the behaviour of a number of councillors didn't reflect well on the town council more generally. But I'll hope you understand why we've had to focus our considerations solely on Councillor Rawlinson's conduct.
Thank you. Yes, thank you, Mr. Mitchell. Any more questions? No? Okay, so now, following the procedure, I shall now ask Mr. Mitchell, our independent person, if he would like to give any advice to the committee.
Thank you, Chairman. I'll be brief. I've read through this report, which I consider to be extremely thorough. really do support, I do support the approach that has been taken, the thoroughness and the attention to detail in the fact-finding and investigation procedure. I don't think that can be faulted, and I support the reasoning that's come from that and the weight given to the different factors that Mr. Oram has applied to this has come up with logical and defendable conclusions in every way that he's done this. Essentially, I don't see any reason that this committee can disagree with the outcome of this report. Essentially, Councillor Rawlinson, as he then wasn't a very good mayor. And it's as simple as that. And where he should have provided leadership to improve working practices and drive standards higher, he did not do so, and in fact contributed to a reduction in such matters. So if I don't really need to say any more than that, Chairman. I think you've got a very thorough report here, and all the information, I've seen a lot of background information on this. I've had several emails, shall we say, over the past year about matters at Burnham-on-Crouch, and there is nothing in here that I've seen that dissents from the information in those that I've had before, and I would suggest that the conclusions that have been reached are very defendable and ones that the District Council could support if they so chose. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Mitchell. Once again, I should just ask, is everybody happy? Are there any more questions? Okay, we will now be moving into P&C, which actually makes me move to the exclusion of the press and the public. I move that the committee resolves that under section 100A4 of the Local Government Act 1972, the public be excluded from the meeting for the specific purpose of deliberation on the standards complaint on the grounds that deliberations involve the likely disclosure of exempt information as defined in paragraph 1 and paragraph 6 of part 1 of schedule 12A to the Act, and that this satisfies the public interest test. I so move. Do I have a seconder? Thank you, Councillor Thompson. Tara, can we... Oh yes, sorry, yes. Do we agree by assent? That's been agreed by assent. Thank you, Tara.
just wait for confirmation that the stream is restarted, Chairman. Yeah, back live, Chairman.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Sorry, I'm just going to shut the curtain. Yeah, please. Good, yeah. Just coming straight in there. Thank you.
There's a stream, Wendy, yeah.
Chairman, we are live streaming, just to confirm.
Thank you everyone. We are back in public. Thank you very much. Welcome everybody. Thank you. She'll just wait for Miss Holmes to reappear. Ah. Yeah. So we're just waiting for one member to come back. So do I read that as well? Do I read that one?
Yes, because that's a little one.
Little one.
Chairman, I have messaged and emailed Mr. Oram as well, asking him to
Thank you,
rejoin.
Tim. Okay, well, we just hang on a second.
You can bring us back
There he
into
is.
public.
Mm-hmm.
You can bring
Thank
us
you.
back into public.
How do I do that?
Yeah, Chairman, so Mr. Oram's
I
rejoined
thought we already
and
were.
we are in public, we're live session, Chairman.
Live session. Right, okay, sorry. As you were.
Thank you very much. Okay. Thank you. We are now back in public, and I shall now read the conclusion of the committee. Little 1, that the committee considered the investigation report attached at Appendix 1. And findings are little 2, that the findings set out in paragraph 3.2 of the report be agreed, and therefore that former Councillor Rawlinson had failed to comply with the following paragraphs of the Code of Conduct. And those are paragraph 1.1 of the Code, because that he did not treat other councillors, in particular Councillor Stamp, with respect when sending offensive WhatsApp messages to the Chief Officer. Paragraph 1.2 of the Code, because he did not treat the Chief Officer with respect when he falsely claimed that he sent out correspondence in his name without his knowledge. Paragraph 2.1 of the Code, because he bullied the Chief Officer at the Town Council meeting on the 25th of March 2024. Paragraph 5 of the Code, because he brought his office and the Town Council into disrepute when he initiated a police investigation into the Town Council's finance without having the necessary authority, and then misleading the Town Council with regards to its progress. The committee accepts the findings that Councillor Rawlinson had not breached the Code of Conduct in relation to the other allegations against him. Former Councillor Rawlinson has resigned as a councillor, and as such, the committee has no power to consider any sanctions against him. Those are the findings of the committee. Thank you. I shall now move on to agenda item 5. We move to agenda item 5, found on pages 69 to 102 of your agenda pack. And I now call on Miss Holmes to explain the process. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, councillors. The process will follow exactly the same as previously, but in this case, we have Councillor Stratton with us, who will be given an opportunity to speak and ask questions through the process along with yourselves. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Mr. Oram, you're there? Yeah, thank you. Would you present this report, please?
Of course, thank you, Chair, and thank you again to members for giving this your care and attention. We obviously, during an investigation, get to sort of live with this information for a number of weeks, so whereas you get it all chucked at you all at once. So thank you again for carefully considering everything that you've had before you. You will see that in this particular case, Councillor Rawlinson was the complainant, and in his complaint, his allegation largely revolved around a vote of no confidence that took place at the Town Council meeting on the 3rd of May 2024. And his complaint was directed towards Councillor Stratton, Councillor Bown and Councillor Siddall-Norman, who were the three councillors who put their name to that proposal for the vote of no confidence. Councillor Rawlinson highlighted in his complaint that the proposal included a supporting document that he said denigrated his character, and it having been published on the Town Council's website, was used by others on Facebook maliciously against him, causing him and his family a great deal of distress. Councillor Rawlinson alleged, therefore, that the actions taken by Councillor Stratton, Councillor Bown and Councillor Siddall-Norman represented a clear attempt to humiliate and demean him and the position of mayor. Again, our findings are set out hopefully clearly in the report, so I don't intend to go through it forensically. I would draw particular attention though to Councillor Rawlinson's own statement, given that he's not here today, and in particular his comments around the supporting document, which he felt included information that was unfairly represented and denigrated his character. He described it as being made up of untruths and twisted narratives, and it was enormously disrespectful towards him. He also pointed to the fact that his term as mayor was due to end only days after this meeting took place, and indeed, in order to have this vote of confidence take place, an extraordinary meeting had to be called to allow it to take place before he was no longer mayor. So we've set out our considerations towards the end of the report. We've briefly told the story, i.e. that on the 8th of April 2024, Councillor Stratton made a formal complaint to the monitoring officer in which he alleged that Councillor Rawlinson had failed to comply with the Code of Conduct, obviously a complaint that members have just considered. Councillor Stratton subsequently said his concerns about Councillor Rawlinson's conduct to Councillors Bowen and Norman Siddall, and asked them both to support a vote of no confidence motion in Councillor Rawlinson as mayor, and they both agreed. Councillor Stratton met with the Town Council's chief officer and asked her to convene an extraordinary meeting so that the Town Council could consider and vote on their proposal. And he provided the chief officer with the supporting document that's found at Annex B of our report, with the intention that it be circulated to members of the Town Council. It was the chief officer who took the decision to allow that document to be published on the Town Council's website and to allow the wording of the motion that was put forward. And then on the 3rd of May, Councillor Stratton, Bown and Siddall-Norman attended the extraordinary meeting, and the account of which we set out in detail in the report. When considering whether the conduct as found amounts to a failure to treat Councillor Rawlinson with respect, we had to recognise that it's long been accepted that members are entitled to call a vote of no confidence in any other member who holds a specific position of authority, be it a mayor, a leader or a chair of an authority. Such proposals are always difficult and can have an emotional impact on the individual being targeted. Often a person's period as a mayor is an incredibly important and proud moment for them. And so we would always suggest that to take a vote of no confidence lightly is something that should be not done, but it is seen as an accepted part of the political landscape within which you all operate. That being the case, obviously it's difficult for us to be too critical of a councillor when putting forward such a motion to explain the reasons for it. Whilst it might have been better to allow the Code of Conduct investigation to play out, which is obviously what members of the Town Council also decided when the vote came before them, clearly the timing of it was to enable the vote to take place whilst he was still mayor. Given that his period of office was due to end, there was clearly a purpose behind that, but we didn't think that it was one that necessarily merited a finding that any councillor should be found in breach of the code. And in relation to obviously the supporting documentation and Councillor Rawlinson's concern that this had been put into the public domain before any of the allegations that it included were tested, we found that the councillors Stratton, Councillor Bown and Councillor Siddall-Norman couldn't be held responsible for that, regardless of whether members think it was done rightly or wrongly. The responsibility of putting it into the public domain lay with the chief officer, and therefore the responsibility couldn't be laid at the door of the councillors. As such, we've recommended that none of the councillors involved are found to be in breach of the Town Council's Code of Conduct. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Oram. We don't have Councillor Bown or Councillor Siddall-Norman, but we do have Councillor Stratton, and I would like to invite you to ask the investigator any questions.
I don't have any questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Stratton. I shall now open that to the floor. So, members. Councillor Stevens.
Thank you, Chair. I do find it quite strange to do this just 3 days before the end of someone's tenure. I can see that nothing was sort of technically breached, but I do find that rather strange, and I wonder if Mr. Oram could comment on whether that's been taken into account or considered at all, please. Thank you.
It was considered, and I have to say that I have a lot of sympathy for your position. It was clearly done in order for a public decision to be made, demonstrating that the Town Council had no confidence in Councillor Rawlinson. Obviously, you know, when the decision was taken to call this meeting, Councillor Rawlinson's tenure was due to end, and he wasn't particularly active in attending council meetings anyway, due to his health. So there was absolutely some, you know, I would suggest some intent to cause Councillor Rawlinson some form of, I guess, have these concerns aired publicly against him and let it be known that the Town Council doesn't have any confidence in him. But we have to weigh that up against the fact that even at town and parish council level, you do all operate within a political environment, and so therefore criticism of each other is something that is accepted as part of the cut and thrust, as they say, of local democracy, and therefore whilst, as I've said, I can understand why you might have concerns within the context of the political landscape within which you operate. This has traditionally been seen as acceptable, and we don't think that calling it in the manner that it was called in this occasion led to there being a breach of the code. But obviously, we make a recommendation only, and it's for yourselves to are best placed to make the decision on that.
Quite happy. Councillor Lay.
Thank you, Chair. Just a couple of questions. Was the Mayor officially off sick at this time, or was it, you just indicated it was sort of sick? What was the status at that time?
He'd been off sick for a number of months, but obviously, as we saw in the previous case, he did actually return to attending council meetings shortly after going on that training course in March, and so was back at the helm, as it were, and had been for a month or two.
Okay.
Obviously, within a town council context, though, that's only a meeting or two.
Okay, thank you for clarifying. And there's no mention or reference to the deputy mayor at all. Was there? Did the deputy mayor take any view on this, or was engaged in this process?
Only to the extent that we set out in that they chaired the meeting in question. They obviously would have been involved, I think, with the chief officer in deciding whether the meeting took place in public or in private. But we didn't see any evidence of their involvement in the documents being published on the website. And obviously their involvement in the discussion that took place at the meeting, I hope, is set out clearly in paragraph 4.28, where we were fortunate to have an audio recording of the meeting, so we were able to set out in detail the ensuing discussion that was had.
Thank you. It's just prior to the process and prior to the meeting being arranged. I just wanted to know if there was an engagement there, but you've explained that. Thank you.
Yes, Mr. Mitchell.
Thank you, Chairman. Just again, I think this is a very thorough report that carefully investigates the issues raised, because there is an issue around timing, as you brought forward, that it's sort of uncomfortable that his term of office is going to end in 7 days, 10 days after the meeting took place, and he would no longer have been mayor, and there wouldn't be a need to register the vote. But equally, there's no reason not to bring it forward. It's not a code of conduct issue, but there is, I think, an issue for the Town Council to have a look at in how it deals with these kinds of matter in future. I've dealt with, when I was in local government, 2 or 3 motions of confidence. They've all been messy, they're all uncomfortable, and they all got lost in the end. And I think the process that was followed by the Town Council, they really ought to have had there's no fault in bringing this forward. It's fine to bring a motion of this kind forward, but I think the Town Council should have had the opportunity to discuss it in private before it became a public discussion, because there were lots of issues in Councillor Stratton's motion that were sort of quite scattergun, and it needed a bit of focus, if there's any help. But I do think that these aren't code of conduct issues, and so there's no, whilst there may be issues around the administration of this, and I don't think that's necessarily down to the council's administrative officers. I think is a sort of corporate issue for them to look at. It might be more appropriate in future to have a private session to look at the terms of reference of this kind of motion, because it doesn't do anybody any credit, I'm afraid.
Sorry, I was just going to say thank you for your comments, and I can only concur. I would make the point that in terms of the timing, the councillors, this was not the first time that Councillor Stratton had sought to put forward the proposal. So, in some sense, he had this concern, and he wasn't being allowed to air it at an earlier point because it seemingly wasn't being processed by the chief officer in that way, or perhaps he didn't have the support of other councillors to get the proposal in. So, I guess there is a reason why it didn't happen earlier, and from the previous case, you can see the wider difficulties that they were having, and maybe at this stage, obviously, the chief officer's concerns about Councillor Rawlinson suddenly aligned with the concerns being expressed by the other councillors, and so it may have been dealt with in a different way. I think there are certainly lessons to be learned here.
Any other members?
Another observation, Chairman. The members that seconded the motion, they're not here. I'm not, and it's more of something to consider. Whether they had the option of seconding the motion, but only if it was heard in part two or in private session, whether that was an option that they could have followed. I don't know. I'm not really aware of. It's not something I'd thought of in terms of how one seconds it, but there may have been an option there to draw back and say yes, this needs to go ahead, but not in the current form. But that's just another observation, Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Mitchell. Councillor Driver.
Yeah, thank you for the report, Mr. Orman, and again, a very detailed report, and probably not easy to pull together the various threads. One of the threads that sits here is the meeting itself when the motion was brought, and it appears that there was a certain lack of clarity in the way in which that meeting was conducted, and I'm just wondering whether there is a view on whether actually the option to have taken that in private was there at the beginning, but was sort of because of the way in which the meeting was conducted meant that opportunity was lost, and whether you have a view on that, Mr. Orman.
Yes, I mean, I have to be quite cautious in what I say, because it's not really for me to make any wider criticisms of the town council. But obviously, I think there are certainly some opportunities for training for staff and for the leadership positions within the town council, and members may want to consider whether whether that's something that they want to recommend that the town council consider. I think that the way that this was dealt with was quite messy, because things had got messy, as we've seen from the previous complaint. And there's a lot of Councillor Rawlinson in presenting us his complaint sent us in excess of 300 documents demonstrating wider issues within the council in terms of what he was having to deal with at the time from other councillors, and a lot of the problems that were going on, which it would be inappropriate for me to focus on, other than to say that we did forensically examine them all to make sure that there was nothing directly relevant. But because of the breakdown in relations between certain councillors and certain members of staff, it did get very difficult for them to deal with, and I don't think they always made the decisions with the clearest of minds. I agree absolutely that matters like this are best dealt with. If you're talking about the allegations that are at that time unproven, or you're talking about asking serious questions about the integrity of individuals, then certainly at this stage it can be best done behind closed doors, and it's unfortunate that wasn't the case here. But I didn't feel that any of the councillors who were complained about could really bear any responsibility for that. It really just comes down to, do they have a right to call a vote of no confidence in their mayor? Yes, they do. Did the way they do it lead me to think that they'd failed to comply with their responsibilities under the code of conduct? No, it didn't, and that's really what it drilled down to, regardless of all of the sort of wider concerns and things that were going on.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Driver. Any other questions? Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. Councillor Stratton, I now invite you to answer or ask any questions, but please, if they can be concise and only in regard to the investigation, please. I do understand that you have a document you would like us to read out in PNC, which I'm happy to do so.
What I would like to say is that...
Thank you.
Thanks. I made multiple attempts to call for meetings, call for an EOM to discuss the vote of no confidence before it happened. There's plenty of documents to substantiate my attempts to meet with the mayor and the deputy mayor and indeed the council, and I was stonewalled on every occasion, not for weeks but for months. I made 3 attempts to call a vote of no confidence. The first one was just ignored, with instructions that it was just to be ignored, despite it being a legal formality. The second one I withdrew after discussing with the chief officer, and the chief officer reassured me that she would try to get a meeting, and it didn't happen. The councillors would not meet with me at all. I've been stonewalled for a year. Let me just put my glasses on. Had the first or second attempt at my vote of no confidence managed to go ahead, then Councillor Rawlinson wouldn't have been free to carry on with his campaign of bullying, which this committee has now upheld. I had the foresight really to see what Councillor Rawlinson was at and what he was doing, and that's it.
Thank you, Councillor. So, again, if there's any questions you would like
No,
to
I don't have any
invite-
questions. I just wanted to
No,
defend the
thank
reason
you
why I
very
was so
much.
close
And
to him resigning, and that wasn't.
Yeah.
It just happened to fall that way.
Thank you. And I do think that Mr. Oram has explained that you did make various attempts to have that vote. So thank you very much. Do you have any other questions? Thank you. Okay, thank you very much. So I think again we now will have to move into P&C. So, oh no, I've got some seconds here. Sorry. Oh yes, sorry. I do have to follow this procedure very, very rigidly. So again, Mr. Mitchell, can I ask if you have any recommendations for the committee?
Oh, thank you, Chairman. No, I think I've said enough. We've heard this subject, and I think Councillor Rawlinson deserves a bit of a rest from me. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So again, I will say I shall now have to move into P&C. So I shall ask for the exclusion of the press and the public, please. And now I have to move. So so I move that the committee resolves that under section 100A4 of the Local Government Act 1972, the public be excluded from the meeting for the specific purpose of deliberating on the standards complaint on the grounds that deliberations involving the likely disclosure of exempt information as defined in paragraph 1 and 6 of part 1 of schedule 12A to the Act, and that this satisfies the public interest test. Do I have a seconder? Thank you very much, Councillor Lay. Oh, sorry, Councillor Neal, I should say, sorry. Do we all agree? Agree. Thank you.
Councillor Stratton, if I can ask you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Stratton.
Mr. Oram gone.
Mr. Oram's gone.
Then we started on about recommendations.
Yeah, I think we have agreed and seconded it.
Chairman, you are now live.
Thank
stream is
you.
back on. Thank you.
Welcome everyone back to the committee meeting. Thank you, and I shall now read out the decision of the committee, that the committee considered the independent investigation report.
Chairman, sorry, I've just got to get Mr. Oren back on.
I'm
Okay.
sorry.
Apologies.
Yes. Great, thank you, Mr. Owen. So I shall read out the decision of the committee, that the committee considered the independent investigation report attached as Appendix 1 to the report, that Councillor Stratton, Councillor Bown, Councillor Siddall-Norman are found not to have failed to comply with the Town Council's Code of Conduct. There are no sanctions to be made in light of the above decision. Those are our findings. I would also now just like to ask Mr. Mitchell, our independent person, to give a slight observation, please.
Yes, thank you, Chairman, thank you, members. It did occur to me, as we listened to the presentation earlier, the discussion we had in public earlier, that it might be helpful for the Town Council, which has gone through a difficult patch. I mean, 7 members have resigned recently. We've got new district council members have been put in place, and you've got an election coming up in January. It might be helpful if during the next few months that the Town Council had a look at its procedures, at its standing orders perhaps, and came up with ways of preventing code of conduct complaints like the one we've been looking at today, that effectively are really matters that are some of them very much outside the remit of this committee that we've been looking at, that members have been looking at. It's just an observation that you just may wish to look at the practices and procedures of the council to make sure that, not that they're watertight, but that motions such as this motion of no confidence, or vote of confidence, whichever way you want to put it, can be brought forward without bringing the code of conduct into play, because it shouldn't have been. It's a procedural matter that has spread. So that's the observation, Chairman. If you could take that on board.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mitchell. That takes me to item 6. Any other items of business that the chairperson decides are urgent, and I have none. That takes us to item 7 of the agenda, which is closing of the meeting. Members, thank you for your contributions this afternoon, and I draw this meeting to a close at 4:30 p.m.
Thank you, Chairman. Just wait for confirmation of the streams.